Ou deixa sua bunda ardendo, ou dá tapa, 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 cara. Welcome to Empowerment Unleashed Now, exploring your inner authority. I'm Michelle Jones.
And I'm Scott Collins.
And this is the place to connect with your highest, most essential self, your most empowered self, where you can explore your inner authority and learn from others and learn more about yourself.
We talk with fascinating people from all walks of life about transformation, healing, hypnosis, astrology, physical experience of being human, and heart-centered living.
We're so thankful that you're here with us. Let's dive right on in. Hi, and welcome to Empowerment Unleashed Now. I'm Michelle Jones, and I'm here with
Scott Collins.
Still him, right?
Yeah.
And our incredible guest today, Micah Stover. It's going to be like a very, Scott, I think you might cry a couple of times during this episode. Happy tears. This is going to be a beautiful episode because you'll find out as we go along in this little story that we're going to tell in this episode that Micah is a very significant person to us because she connected Scott and myself. So we're going to begin, Scott. I'm like so loving this episode 26.
Wow.
Finally going in linear order.
Mm-hmm.
No Star Wars prequel.
Mm-hmm.
No like epilogue. And time is like, finally we're going linear time, and linear time means nothing. But today is episode 26, and it is healing with courage and how it begins with courage. Healing starts with courage. And I think that this is perfect time to tell everybody Micah's incredible credentials, who she is, her experiences, because it's kind of interwoven into this beautiful being. So Micah Stover is a prominent voice that is really coming to the forefront of the emerging, I would say, experiential field in psychedelics. It's a therapeutic experience that Micah helps to teach people be able to facilitate, as well as she herself facilitates that. And she has over 8 years, like just training from a clinical standpoint, as well as with indigenous perspectives to the work, which I think is integrally, like it's just an integral component of all of this. My God, I'm going to just be honest. My tongue is like super twisted. I have to like get these words out. It's like, I think I'm so blown away by the energy right now.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys, I'm going to pull it together. I'm usually not tongue twisted.
Mm-hmm.
Does that go with like step 21 where it starts to get fun on this 21-degree Aries, Scott?
I think it goes more so with that the sun's moving into a conjunction with Chiron, which is very appropriate for the healing starts with courage because, Chiron is the wounded healer.
Oh, yeah. No, this is right on.
You're collectively moving right now for these next few days. Like that's being presented to all of us.
Yeah.
Collectively, and whatever our individual aspect of that is right now.
And that's part of why, like, the themes that we try to stay in touch with are, I would say somewhat woven through the states of awareness that we're all moving in our lives at this time. So let's get back to Micah because I'm not done introducing her. Okay. Got to get this all out without any tears. Scott and I talked about this before. So Micah is certified in psychedelic somatic therapy, and she is somebody who is really bringing, I would say, a very interesting conversation around safety and harm, reduction as well. She writes for and sits on the board of Women in Psychedelics, which is a growing platform for women that are seeking, I would say, healing community around psychedelic medicines. And as a woman, I would say that that's muy importante, like one of the most important things for safety, sure. as well as Micah's therapeutic. She has like 15 years of coaching and teaching experience in her practice as well. So are incredibly blessed to talk about how we can still getting with like courage, which I personally think that to have any kind of psychedelic experience or tapping, courageous place within yourself, strength of heart to be able to do that work. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mike Stover. Scott, you're gonna get to cry in a second, but we need to let Micah talk.
Yes, we do.
Hi, Micah. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, guys. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me. And what a special synergy of energies and stories intertwined. It's really nice to, it's funny how things weave and go. So I'm just really honored to be here.
Thanks for sharing time and space with us, Micah. Hey, Scott, let's pull out the Kleenex. Go for it, Brett.
Yeah. Well, for the listeners, I go pretty far back with Micah Stover. I performed at her wedding, even. And like the most profound thing, Micah was the first person I ever worked with in a controlled psychedelic setting and did what's referred to often as like soul retrieval work. And Micah, you know this, Micah, but you really were the one that held that space for me and opened that door, which does require courage, and bravery is always necessary when you're working with these powerful, especially indigenous plant medicines. But just to the listeners, I talk about plant medicine a lot in a lot of forms, including psychedelics, but I want everybody to know that really this is the person that ushered me in from the get-go and opened the portal, unintended, to self-healing, and then sharing that with others, and just like helping it be an expansive thing that we can all hopefully collectively use to heal and move on from. So
Yeah.
so great to have you, Micah, to share your wisdom with our listeners.
I'm so glad to be here. We do go way back.
We go way back.
Listeners should know, predating all of that, we were just young kids on Ellison Place in Nashville, hopping around to
True.
places like that.
Yes.
Long history.
Rock and roll.
That's the truth. Yes. I love that. I love that connection. No, because there's like a soul connection in that, right? And I think that, Scott and I talk about like family of light, talk about, we once even put out a prayer bro, right? To like find like our family of light.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it, like Micah would be kind of like the top, like if it were a pyramid of light, she would like where it is with like her light, And so one of the things that I really wanted to start to unpack today for our listeners is really stepping into your power by healing, I would say, trauma at like the nervous system like level, and like embracing our courage to do that. It's Aries season. It's a pretty bold time. It's a little bit fiery. And I think that, this is obviously a topic that can be both raw and enlightening, right? And I just think, Micah, that we are so fortunate to have your grounded like guidance on like how to help people maybe consider things they've never considered to help them to begin again.
Yeah. I feel like over the last 9 years since I've sort of entered into this world and experienced myself, it's been crazy to watch how it's evolved and changed. When I first entered into it, it was very much, at that time I was living in Portland, and it was like underground hush hush. And then we moved to Mexico. And, it's like one of those things that I couldn't have planned this if I tried, because I'm not as clever as the universe is by any stretch. And then I found myself sort of nestled in this like little enclave of healers and practitioners of indigenous orientation, Mexican ethnicity, who've been handling medicines and or descended from lineages who handled medicines and various sorts of healing modalities. And they just sort of like took me in under their wings. And so I feel really, really fortunate that in my experience or my kind of like orientation to working with the medicines, that I have this kind of hybrid relationship of being clinically informed and studied, but also really indigenously mentored. And the balance of those two things, I think, is so integral, especially when we consider like all kinds of topics that we could go down good rabbit holes about, like harm reduction, safety for people, right relationship, non-appropriative consumption of medicines. Like there's just so much to consider, and both the clinical and the indigenous perspectives really have very different points of view, but lots of validity to offer to the conversation.
What
Sure.
would you say are some of the more pertinent areas on the Venn diagram that those two schools of thought overlap?
Hmm. That's a good question. I mean, I think that at the core, like in the overlapping space, both the indigenous healers as well as the clinical is it the clinical practitioners who are working from that space of do no harm with a lot of integrity are wanting to kind of address trauma at the root. Like get to the root cause of what's going on here so that we can effectively help people to alchemize their pain into some sort of purpose, like take their karma and like extend into their dharma. I think that can be that's shared from the clinical side as well as the indigenous. But that might be, and that's a pretty important essence to share. But then everything else is sort of different, like how the clinical practitioners go about it, how they set the stage for facilitating. Um, Versus in more indigenous contexts, those things look really, really different. And then the conversation starts to splinter and fracture in all sorts of different ways.
Like when you're referring to clinical, is it the MAPS protocol that you're referring to a lot, or is it other things?
Yeah. I mean, that's one, I think, primary clinical
Yeah.
entity and approach, specifically in working with MDMA as a medicine. That's where all the majority of their clinical research has been. They're also doing research with cannabis, but there's so many different clinical models and methods at this point for working with people with psychedelics. Like another one that I'm trained in is called the psychedelic somatic interrelational process, or PSIP, some people will refer to it as. And that is working specifically with ketamine and or cannabis. And it's specifically targeting the nervous system. It's a very different model. So there's lots of different clinical um I don't know if we want to call them like pedagogies or processes for how to facilitate. Internal family systems is another therapeutic model that I think is really rich when it comes to uh, adding psychedelics. Um, so there's a lot of different ways that practitioners go about it, drawing from the therapeutic models they've been trained in, and then you add the entheogenic medicine and new sparks fly.
Yeah. If there's someone considering doing psychedelic therapy and you haven't before,
Mhm.
whether you've never done psychedelics at all, or maybe if you have, you've only done them recreationally, what kind of advisory would you give to intuit or decide which psychedelic is best for you? Making those kind of decisions and who to work with and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, this is a great way to show how the clinical and the indigenous world might approach that question even different.
Yeah.
Like there's all sorts of research happening now from the clinical world where they're actually starting to do like genetic testing to see what person's body will respond to better as far as from the different psychedelic medicines that are out there. From an indigenous perspective, the answer is pretty simple. It's you work with the medicine that calls to you.
Yeah.
You respond to the call. You don't go hunting and you don't consume just because you're curious. It's a much more discerning, like the medicine is doing like this, like I'm calling to you. So
Yeah.
we have something to work out together. And that's not really a matter of genetic testing as far as I'm concerned. That's something on a whole other metaphysical realm. I think then to get to your question, what do people need to consider is like how to find the place of discernment within their own intuition and conscious self of how to recognize that call. Because when people are hurting and they're in an activated space, the hungry heart that wants to heal can feel that almost anything is a call. So it's like, is it urgency, like the desperate need to feel better? Or is it that true, deep, like discerned, oh no, I'm being asked to do something? And one of the ways that I talk to people about how to discern the difference is the one is like hungry hearted, eager beaver, urgency, frenetic, and the other is like, oof, I'm kind of scared here, but I think I
Exactly.
feel an undeniable tug at the ankles.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well
that's
put.
been completely my experience. Is have a lot of reverence for medicine-based ed. I have had minimal experience. I felt, called once. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. I worked with someone who was like a trained facilitator, and it worked exactly the way it was supposed to go. And then healing, had occurred within me, and I was looking to the jungle, if you will, for answers, as I had spent a lot of time in Costa Rica and knew that all the answers were in the jungle, that every plant that we need is in the jungle. And so I just, I started to hear like just an echo of what I was supposed to be doing. And I would say, Micah, that I'm somewhere of a blend in between. Like I will first feel the call,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna like kind of do my research, like extensively, and like try to understand it before, because I want to show the plant, the medicine, the respect,
Right.
right? Like I want to build like a respect-based relationship, because trust me, I've never entered into the space where I have felt anything other than like deep, humble bow to it, because I know the power of it. And it's like learning to walk on coals, and you better not take advantage
No.
of that enlightenment that it affords you in any way, shape, or just for me, right? So my Gemini rising is getting all serious, like any way, shape, or form. But and judgment not for me to render, like I'm not trained in this. I'm just saying my own approach, or something that I was doing to gain back vision, my right eye, and I just I'm humbled by the power of plants.
Well, I mean, so I think in indigenous worlds, we would refer to what you're describing as right relationship. So when we stand in right relationship with a sacred plant medicine, we have that reverence is like the thing, right? And so that is so important, because the other thing that I would say, like, as someone who's trained to work with what I consider medicines and then plant spirits. So let me tease that out a little. Ketamine is a medicine. MDMA is a medicine. Psilocybin is a plant spirit. So cannabis is a plant spirit. So when I think about this in my work with people, like, if someone is not really in touch with their own spirit, I'm going to probably recommend, for safety purposes, for orientation purposes, that they start working with a medicine that's going to help them come to know their own spirit a little bit more before they jump past this like inner world relationship to trying to do relationship with a massive plant spirit. So that's another really important thing that I think gets missed a lot. And especially when we go into these like indigenous settings and we have the best of intentions, but we sort of don't know what we don't know, is that we don't understand it through their worldview, because we don't live in a village. We don't live in relationship to the earth the same way that they do. And so we don't necessarily have this innate orientation to thinking, this is a spirit and I'm about to do relational work with a spirit. Yeah, it's a plant and it has a spirit. It's sentient. The other thing I think is interesting about what you said about the jungle, I wonder, I mean, I have come to think that the language the medicine speaks is all metaphor and symbol. And I think that the jungle is perhaps a symbol of the wild, and that the wisdom is in the wild. But the wild is everywhere. Like, it's out there, it's in here, and it's, can we rekindle that? And maybe we need to go to the jungle to remember what that's like, because it's a little too sterile over here. But that symbol of being in the lush and the wild is part of the medicine.
Yeah. I just, for me, it's a beautiful crash course, all of the time in the last, decade plus that I've really spent in Costa Rica on and off for extended periods, is the absolute understanding that there's a spirit like within a plant, just like within its a sentient being. They
Right.
get the communication of the water with plants, with the animals, with the plants. And so it's just a very, for me, I think that the courage part of like getting with courage was, as an urbanite, I'm used to kind of like trolled
Mm-hmm.
sub-wild.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you have to invite that in to a degree that you're comfortable, right? Like I've always said, like, you're probably never going to catch me laying on a jungle floor doing ayahuasca in this life. I'm just guessing. It just doesn't seem like a me thing to do. Never say never, but so far. And I just think that that is so beautiful, Micah, frame of a spirit and as a sentient like being, like looking at plants in that way.
Yeah.
It explains a lot, as I just had something happen recently, and it's not like about psychedelics, but had some painters that were here doing some work, and it was winter, like transitioning into spring. They did not know that, like, we're trampling like the azaleas. Like they couldn't really see them, like, and there was pine straw. It like, I was sad. Not like at them, but like my heart like felt hurt, because like plants were like dead.
Right.
And I was like, oh, and I never had, I mean, I've always cared for plants. Like when I was a teacher, I would take like the straggly plants that everybody like left over, like at the summertime, and they would just be like, "Oh, I want that." My God, how do you just leave like a plant, like a plant? And so, like, I get that, but it's so important to bring this back into awareness for people that might be contemplating like working with plant medicine and proper quote unquote, weighing of, do I need to begin maybe with medicine, like you were talking about, like ketamine or MDMA, like that is a really great, I think, a nugget for people, as you should be afraid of psychedelics a little bit.
Humbled.
Yeah.
Up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Approaching it with reverence is advised.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When that's missing, I'm always like, we need to tap on the brakes here because something is askew. And I feel like that's part of what I mean, I always think of source as Pachamama. It's the earth mother. She speaks to me and she's like, you're not going in there with somebody that doesn't have right reverence. That's your job. And I think of her as my boss, and I got to do my best to discern what she's saying to me. And it's like a really beautiful, humbling responsibility. And a lot of times people will say, because they've got that urgency, they want to feel better. And psychedelics are rarely the first line of things that they've tried, And so they're like, but I read the book or I saw the thing. And it's just so mythicized how it actually goes versus what's really involved. So I always say to people, well, if we're going to do this, we're just going to need to commit to the journey that it is. And then when people don't want to do that, then I'm like, well, I'm probably not going to be the right for you.
Yeah, I totally get that because,
Yeah. That's the relationship part of all
that's right.
talking about, like the spirit, the sentient experience. Like any relationship, right? I mean, the more healthy it is, the more you respect one another, the more you're going to get out of any mutual experience. This is just one where if you approach it irreverently, I mean, do it at your own peril, really. No matter who's sitting with you or how good the shaman is or indigenous, like it's your own peril with that plant spirit that you're going to have to reckon with.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I have a couple of questions just based on like the relational aspect that you were talking about, Micah and Scott, like the reverence component, right? Like, I'm wondering if, like, my question would be, what is creating from within the human experience this drive for people right now to really be returning to psychedelics as possibly they did in the 1960s? None of us were, there for that. Like, what do you attribute this return to? Like, is it really, coming into right relationship with ourselves and with one another? And this is just like a conduit that's really expeditiously transformative at times when done in right relationship. I mean, I don't know. I'm just hypothesizing.
I've thought about this a lot. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting parallels to like the time of the first psychedelic renaissance, which you're referring to, and now, right? Like we've got political, global unrest, wars that are being protested. We've got like a kind of like emerging upswell of consciousness seeking, and then an oppressive force that wants to shut that down. So it's like that happened then, happening now. And so I think, like maybe some listeners don't know that everything that's happening now in the psychedelic world happened. I have clients who lived through the first psychedelic renaissance and they're like, this is my homecoming. I did this already. how interesting to kind of come full circle. But then I also think the more I do this work, you said earlier, Michelle, like what linear and also, but what is time? Like I have come to believe it's a spiral, like more than it is a line. And so just deconstructing that healing is like a progression towards a final outcome and more understanding the cyclical nature of life, creation, destruction, and that these cycles are necessary. They're like purging and regenerative.
Yeah. And I even think like this, I love this spherical, you said spiral, but I like the more even spherical imagery of how time exists and timelines, because that allows us to have quantum change. It doesn't have to take forever. And like, especially that's where our plant spirits or the medicines can come in handy and help really usher us into quantum immediate. Now we can ping pong to this furthest point of light, farthest away from us on the sphere. It's not like this long, tedious, linear thing we have to drudge through. Other antiquated approaches to healing may exist like that, but now, especially in the age of Aquarius and especially with nonlinear time, we can like achieve these things immediately. And plant therapies are like a tremendous way to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the quantum leaps that folks, can take are really profound, which is why I think people are engaging,
Yeah.
But I feel like as it's a spirit-based relationship, I feel like humanity had to be vibrating in a certain place in order for those plant beings, those sentient spirits to want to emerge and come into our consciousness again. Like we had to be in right relationship enough. And so like as much as, Pachamama might be shaking off some fleas right now, I feel like our frequency and vibration, it takes courage to sustain, I would say, um, a heart-based, still vibing with, yeah, we are getting, like, even in the face of where see, Shiva, right? You see the destruction, like you see, but, it has to transform sometimes by just spinning out.
We
And
do
I
that
think,
by us getting better. Yeah, if I get better,
yes,
so we gets better. So like, am I feeling better? Did this work with the plant spirit or the other men? Like, have I changed in a quantum way? Then we have. That's how it works.
it is how it works. And that infinite, like, all of mirrors, I think, is now how I think of like time space, right? Like this whole, like, and fractals, just of light in that mirror, us just, whoosh, I mean, it just shoots through like to this extended space time experience. I'm getting God goosebumps that I think that's a very connective and attractive piece of why people are entering psychedelic quantum realms. Like life in the suit in this density, I think for some folks is really heavy. And to me, I just, I like to think that we're a little bit better off, than once were because have these tools now where messengers, people can have these conversations where in ways in the 60s it was very experiential, just beginning to scribe and really start to take notice on a greater scale of what could happen with consciousness and evolution. the aid of like plants. This is just, it's just a very interesting time to be alive. You have to be doing something right, or else it just wouldn't be in front of us.
Mm.
And I think that, Micah, like in indigenous cultures, especially where you were, it was always right in front of them because they were living in the wilds.
They were living in the wild. So it wasn't a stretch for them the way it's a stretch for us. And the other thing is like, I always tell people is like, well, and it's because it's what was told to me by one of the indigenous healers who I worked really closely with. I think Scott even met her, Gabi, when he was visiting. And she's just a force of nature. And she was like, listen, this is what it boils down to. We're doing better than your people because 3 things. We stay connected to the earth as mother. We stay connected to our village. And we stayed like in acts of service. And those are the pillars. And if you can stay in that connection with your village, like all of I think this hyper individuation is a trauma response. Everybody's sort of in their own silos. And then we're not connected to the earth. So every single person I've known who's gone through this process and gotten better and stayed better, not only was the plant medicine part of that process, but developing a real relationship with the earth as mother was huge in changing. And then moving beyond the sense of self as like, what is my plight and how will I resolve my plight? But like that karma dharma cycle of like, what's my service here? How is this karmic assignment then become like alchemized through service?
I experienced that exactly what you're saying. I mean, by working with you, and then like what I was able to carry and bring forward into the rest of the work that I've done in my life since. So that resonates.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, Micah, what would you suggest for people that might be considering learning more and finding a practitioner?
Finding a practitioner.
Finding someone, a guide, a practitioner, depending upon where they sit, the range of facilitators.
Yeah. So one of the things that I say to people is there's not like a one size fits all. Like what's right for you, what's right for me might be totally different. Not because one is better or worse, but just because each of us with what we're coming with needs something different in order to help alchemize our healing. I mean, I have chapters devoted to this topic in the book is like, how do I find the right person to hold this sacred space for me? Like, and I think that it's really important that people go, take that decision, deeply to heart, because I also actually believe it's not just the relationship with the medicine or the plant spirit, but it is the relationship with the person who's facilitating, because we get wounded in relationship there too. We must heal, right? So the person who's holding the space for you in like clinical psychological terms, we refer to it as transference, but there's this huge opportunity to receive the like wounds or projections of the inner child and be in the archetypal space of mother or father and offer a corrective experience to that like child within. And talk about goosebumps, talk about alchemy. You can really actually see and feel the cells reassembling themselves in a corrective like redesign based on that new input. Like, for example, it can be as simple as like a clean and clear archetypal maternal figure saying, none of this was your fault. And because people are in this open and receptive space, it's not just an idea to think in their mind, it's something their body can take in without it needing to go through all of these defenses and logical rejections and analyses. It's just like received. that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That makes sense. I also just want to mention just briefly, Micah, before we go to your book, your course, all of that. And bro, am I having a psychedelic experience? Why are you in the dark? I feel like I'm in this scary movie again.
What happened? You
That-
did go a little into the dark.
The sun is setting. I need to turn a light on.
Are there no lights in the gulag?
Very few.
I'm scared. Ah, it's happening again. We had one episode, Michael, where Scott had like a skull sitting behind him, and then he put like a candle under his face. Was like,
Oh.
shit. Oh, there you are, bro.
Is that better?
Oh, howdy. Good to see you today. Nice. All right. And we're back. Now, Micah, I was going to ask you before we talk about, oh, Scott, I'm not scared with the book, like, your course, like your work with people. I wanted to ask you, and I'm curious about this. The first time that I ever went into the Temescal, into Sweat Lodge, no drugs, right? I had a psychedelic experience.
Totally. Yes. I love that you're bringing this up because I try to tell people all the time psychedelic experiences that are not limited to the ingesting of meds.
That's what I was just going to ask you about. So I thought that was true, but I wanted to ask the expert.
And some of us neurodivergent folks, which I think most of us are more than less, especially
Yes.
you're, have, psychic portals that open. I was born psychedelic, and then the medicines just really helped me understand that as my nature. But I had so many psychedelic experiences. Let me just name a couple that top at the list. The death of my grandfather, who was my first spirit guide, the birth of my children, wildly psychedelic experiences. Travel is also psychedelic. Why? Because at the core, we're talking about redefining the sense of self in relation to time and space. Our whole egoic construct of identity is dismantled and then has to rebuild. Those are all psychedelic experiences. And of course, and I think the more we open our sort of channels to that, the more we can have them in these, I can get acupuncture now and go to totally far away.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I love how you referenced that the plant spirit or the medicines didn't cultivate that knowing and relationship and ability to access it in a different way in your walking life. I remember one of the first journeys I did with you, Micah, and it's interesting because we're on the heels of interviewing a Jungian dream analysis person, but the dream state, dreaming, is that to me is the most similar feeling of when you're in these psychedelic spaces and what it feels like if you know how to lucid dream or have any kind of dream recall. And of course, another really close one is meditation. You can get into those states in meditation once you unlock those parts of the unconscious.
Yeah.
That's it. It's just, and then then you're a trance junkie.
Yeah, no, totally. Meditation wise, I've had it in a 20-minute meditation where I've completely left my body.
I think the other thing that, one of the curanderos who I work with still very closely said to me at one point years ago, you need to understand that the point is not to live for ceremony. You go to ceremony to understand that life is the ceremony. So you're remembering that vibration, you're remembering all of that so that you can weave it back to the everyday. And so I think that that's so in alignment with what we're talking about now, where it's one of the ways for myself, and I encourage this with people who are in my care, to think about, because we live in this funny world that's very focused on progress and results. And I'm like, well, okay, so if we're going to really focus on that, then how ceremonial is life feeling? And then people are like, like what? Like taking out the garbage, like brushing my teeth? Yes. Add ritual and see what happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As life is the ceremony.
I love that advice.
It's so important to
Yeah.
sacred and mundane.
It is so important because so one of the things that, and this is a little bit of a judgment alert. I think sometimes people get addicted to the perspective and have an attachment to the medicine and not an attachment to themselves and the transformation of consciousness that it afforded them that they then have within them. Like you've allowed that into you, like you don't need the medicine continually to keep experiencing that which you have already merged with and become one with. So that's just like another, I really enjoy this conversation because for me, I have had such limited exposure. Like, God, listeners, Scott, people have heard me say, I was like, Scott, my line was like, what? Like, my life is psychedelic enough. Like, I don't need psychedelics. It's like, like it already is. However, in a very targeted way, for me, with reverence in my heart to attain, it was to attain improvement, not outcome, but like for me, it was about my vision because what happened was everybody told me, oh, you can't reattach an optical nerve. Okay, cool. So, like, your vision, therefore, is going to whatever that story was, right? Not correctable with a lens anymore. And the particular plant medicine that I worked with afforded me an immediate, like, the first time that I was in the medicine space, it was like being in an ophthalmological office and literally showing me lenses. Like it was like the choir of angels were immediately working on my eyes. Do that. And my vision has improved upwards of 30 to 35%. And it's not worsening. Oh my God, Scott, scary almost that light flickering. So like I really have like just such reverence, Micah, for what you've brought to this. Like this is a really juicy kind of like chew on this for a while, folks. Like really. Like, okay, so Micah, tell us about your book, your courses, and how we can get to you.
Yeah. So I wrote a book called Healing Psychedelics. It was a long gestational period. I really started it like basically in the days and weeks after my oldest son was born, which is so fascinating in hindsight because I had seen a psychic like 3 years before. And the first thing she said when I walked through the door was like, I can't wait to read your book. And I was like, I haven't written a book. I really want to, but I don't know if I ever will. And she was like, oh, honey, it's because you haven't lived the story yet. I was like, okay. And then sure enough, like as soon as he was born, it just all started coming out, which isn't I'm just connecting dots throughout the conversation. We talked about the indigenous versus the clinical. In my postpartum period of my first pregnancy, because it was a very traumatic pregnancy and I lost a baby, my baby that made it and were very precarious for quite some time and in the NICU. And then when we got released to go home, from a clinical perspective, I was diagnosed as having postpartum psychosis. What that looked like for me, because it can show up in a lot of different ways, is that I was like hearing ghosts and the ghosts were telling me things about my lineage and like giving me instructions and orders. Meanwhile, when I recounted this story sometime later to like indigenous healers who I worked with in Mexico, they're like, you weren't having a psychotic break. You were like in touch with your lineage and your ancestors, like a portal open. But now I've lost. Why did I go off on that rabbit hole? Something you said about, so the book really came out of that. That was the beginning of writing the book. And then I think it took so long to gestate because in the beginning, it was a catharsis. It was a telling of those stories that I was hearing of my ancestors in my lineage. It was like, and also an understanding, what is the lineage that I came from? Because there were so many secrets kept that I had to really go digging and excavating to find the truth of what that was. Most of my female ancestors were midwives, which is really interesting because in many ways I think of my work as midwifery, just of a different kind, right? And also midwives were witches back then. And some people think what I do is witchy now. And I'm pretty cool with it at this point. But I think along the way, as I started working with people and holding space, I realized this is not my story. This is like a collective story about the universality of human suffering and the ways in which there are tools of the earth and some accidentally discovered in laboratory experiments that have the capacity to change lives from this sort of wasteland of treatment resistant trauma to, I continue to use this phrase, like moving from karma to dharma.
Mhm.
And really what was the defining moment for me in saying, I will see this thing through come hell or high water, was a young woman who I had known in a different capacity years prior, reached out to me after years of not talking, having had a psychedelic experience that was facilitated in very unethical, unsafe ways. And, uh, arguably, she should have probably never gone into a psychedelic state uh, in the condition that she was in, but she was violated there. And that young woman left the earth side. And when that happened, it felt to me like a real call to action because more and more of these stories were emerging. And that's when I became very acutely aware of like, oh, this is like a part of my assignment to be like a canary in the coal mine. Like, we cannot have this sacred space become a predatory space, become a commodified space. Because when you commodify the sacred, we all lose.
Mhm.
So it was really her life. And there's a whole chapter about her in the book that was like, this book is happening and finishing. And then, at that point in my practice, it was already starting to evolve where there was so much more expansion of psychedelics. It was less underground. Clinical trials were having crazy success. And so people were looking for more education, whether they wanted to be facilitators or whether they just wanted to go about, to your question you asked earlier, how do I educate myself to know what I'm doing? So that another thing I talk a lot about is what does it mean to give conscious consent to something that you don't actually know what the heck is going to happen when you open Pandora's box? Yet I believe we can consciously consent when we are really oriented to what that might mean.
Yeah. And also, like, how do we navigate? Um, it's inevitable that a certain part of the population is going to try to commodify the sacred if it can be profitable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the way it is, right? So I feel like in this Aquarian age, there is a huge a part of that existence with the different frequencies is community, right? So it's like it's actually reverting to the micro instead of the macro, and we like have all our little micro small communities. There's going to be attempts to commodify. It's already happening.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, you're talking about how different it was since you were in Portland, and it's just like I don't think that's slowing down. So it's how we pivot and adjust. The ones that want to continue to create and honor the sacred, and the indigenous have done that. But I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something really important. I think we're on a precipice of right now, and just like even though it's going to be more talked about and accepted on a macro, but like still like keeping plenty of places and spaces that it's not about profitizing it necessarily or commodifying it. It is about energy exchange. Always. It's how we have to move forward doing things. But yeah, just that awareness. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say too, isn't it just an energetic exchange? Like for folks that might need to pay X amount to get what they need. Some people need that. And I'm not saying right nor wrong. I'm just, like executive coaching, psychedelic.
Yeah. I mean, all we can do is manage how we behave.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
We bring integrity and authenticity to it, then we can bring that to our small circle. The 6 people around us are the ones we influence or influence by, and we can all do that in our small ways. And that's the way forward. I mean, that's the age of Aquarius with the most crazy technology you could ever imagine.
Some of which might already be around us and you don't even know it. But I wanted to just say before Micah scoots away from us, Micah, how do we find you? How do we work with you? I know, is it micahstoverconsulting.com?
Yeah, or you can just Google my name, micahstover.com. Both work.
Yay.
And I'm also on Instagram at Micah Sugarfoot is my Instagram handle. And please go to my website. I have not been as consistent lately, but typically I send out like a monthly newsletter. And in that newsletter, I'll include, some of my philosophical musings on what's happening in the world and life, as well as sharing things that I'm offering, like teachings, retreats, podcasts that I've had the opportunity to be part of, things like that. So please check out my website and sign up for the newsletter if you're interested. And yeah.
Is that your indigenous name?
Is that what?
Your indigenous name, Micah Sugarfoot?
No, that is actually the name that my grandfather gave me. He called me Sugarfoot. And, he really was my first spirit guide. We had a very special relationship. And I have come to the understanding that he was like my secure attachment as a young person, and he was asked to leave the earth very early in my life. I was probably I think I was 16 or 17 at the time, and I think his passing was part of my initiation into my whole rest of my life, because I actually learned to talk to spirit because I had to continue the conversation with him somehow, which is amazing. So I give a lot of my just who I am and what I believe is a reverent look back towards him.
Honor. So sharing. So, Micah, thank you for your time today with us, sharing what you have, the wisdom, reverence, the love.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for introducing me in the show.
Oh, yeah. How special is that?
Yeah.
Totally. Thank you.
Infinite gratitude.
Yep. It was like finding really like a cosmic sibling.
I thought
And
feeling about that.
You did.
yeah. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't all be. So, we're so humbled. And we have much gratitude for that. So thank you forever, because obviously part of our soul tribe. Scott, my brother, is it some affirmation time before we head on out?
Yeah.
Thank you.
On this Chiron Sun conjunction, bravery is necessary. Bravery is willing to let go. Bravery is gracious. Gratitude is brave. Bravery may hurt. Bravery may not. Bravery is malleable. Bravery is compassionate. Bravery never fails. It exists below failure. That is the genius of bravery. It is the foundation of the pyramid, not a way around or over it. Bravery is necessary to break through.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Micah. Thank you to you, Scott. Thank you, Noah. Thank you to all of our beautiful listeners out there. Go out there, be empowered. And I just want to leave you guys with a thought from this powerful episode. And I'm not who I was. I'm actually who I can choose to become. And so I just want you guys to kind of put that in the hopper, and we will see y'all next time. Thank you so much. Stay empowered, guys. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Empowerment Unleashed Now. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and let us know how this helped you.
Join us right here every week for another episode.
All right, dude. So this is the chit chat, the after show, if you will. Whew. I was like, feel like learning with that and like just in a totally different like zone.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I feel like I'm like kind of off planet still. Like, usually after like we tape stuff, I'm like, yeah, let's do this. I'm like all pumped up, like ready to go on the field, like with the ball, like the quarterback or something. I'm just like, oh my God, am I going to be lifted up by like a laser, like, and taken to the ship? I'm just out there, dude.
Yeah. I could like feel my heart, see it levitating out in front of me the whole time.
Is that when the lights went out?
Maybe. Total eclipse.
Why did your lights go out, dude?
It was just the sunset, and I didn't have any lights on as backup.
God, there was no backup light.
The only natural light, and yeah.
So like my brother like was like, I don't know, he was YouTubing some episode, one of the 3 people that actually YouTubed it or something. And sure enough, like it calls me on the phone. It's like, because he hadn't gotten to the part yet where I asked, he goes, why is Scott in the dark? I was like, dude, I address it. Keep listening. So I feel like this is like another one of those funny moments. Like Micah was, of course, saying very profound, deep. I'm just like, where deep is the light going? Like what? It's dark. And then that candle started coming up under you again, like the scary. It was a lot. We're talking about psychedelics. It was just hilarious. I mean, all at once. So, like, okay, question. Favorite psychedelic for like song?
Favorite psychedelic song?
No, the psychedelic furs.
Oh, psychedelic furs song. Gosh, I like all their songs. I'm terrible with titles though.
Sing us one.
Pretty in Pink. Did they do Pretty in Pink?
Yeah.
It is Pretty in Pink, right? I like that. Favorite. I know that's like the hit, but I like it.
I'm jaw on the ground. Did you see that response? Like, I was like, what?
What's
We
your favorite?
actually shared this in common too, and Prince.
Yeah.
Scott, there's a side to you, bro, that I don't know that you acknowledge enough.
Really? What side is it?
Because you think you think like you're like this anarchist, like so like anti like the neoclassical punk. Like you have taste. And you are a hit maker. Like, I'm going to reinforce this. We're going to do a little hypnosis, not so covertly. And I really, like, I'm obsessed with your briefcase, dude. Like that Louis Vuitton that you're going to leave me in the will. Look, I'm like pouncing like a freaking desk. I'm so impassioned by it. And so, like, the whole Pretty in Pink thing, this is a new dimension in our relationship, brother. Do you hum a little bit of it? Because you sing. You do a little
Oh boy.
Can you do a little tune? Is this not fair on the spot? My God.
Gotta have a British accent, right?
No. But you just could you give us like the musical notes like dun, 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 dun. Come on, I'm not the
No.
singer.
I'll play a song some other time on the show, though.
No, only if
I
it's
would.
Pretty in Pink. That's it.
Deal.
Oh my God. All right, that's it. Mic drop. We're out.
Mic
That's
drop.
perfect.